Who is shutting the door on China-U.S. communications on defense matters? The United States claims that China rejected its proposal for Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin to meet with his Chinese counterpart Li Shangfu in Singapore on the sidelines of a major annual security conference this week. China responded, quote-unquote, the contacts and exchanges between the two militaries have not been interrupted and, quote-unquote, communication cannot be carried out without principle and bottom line. What does it mean? What is really going on between the two sides? Meanwhile, Chinese foreign minister stressed that the U.S. should not talk about communication while continuously suppressing and containing China. With the relationship in stalemate, how to break the ice? I'm pleased to be joined from Guangzhou, southern China, by Professor Chen Dingding from the School of International Studies at Jinan University, and from Washington, D.C. by Eland, Director of Center on Peace and Liberty at Independent Institute, a nonprofit public policy research and educational organization. Gentlemen, long time no see. So first, Professor Chen, let me go to you. The Pentagon said on Monday that China had declined an invitation extended in early May, and that the PRC's concerning unwillingness to engage in meaningful military discussions will not diminish the Department of Defense's commitment to seeking open lines of communication with the People's Liberation Army at multiple levels as part of responsibly managing the relationship. Why did the U.S. reach out to China, in your opinion? What exactly is the United States hoping to discuss during these meetings?
Thank you, Liu Xing, for the invitation. Well, I think the U.S. side wants to, first of all, stabilize U.S.-China relationship a little bit, at least, according to the rhetoric. And to do so, we need to have, formal exchange mechanisms between the two sides, especially between the two military sides. So this is a very important, mechanism for both governments to maintain regular exchanges and hopefully stabilize the relationship. And but the issue is, of course, whether the U.S. side is sincere in sending out this message, or just cheap talk, trying to use cheap talk to let China to get some concession, compromises in some other areas. This is the real issue.
Now, from the Chinese side, Tang Kefei, who is spokesperson for the Ministry of National Defense, said on Wednesday that what I want to stress is that dialogue and communication cannot be carried out without principle and bottom line. The United States is fully responsible for the current difficulties in U.S.-China military-to-military exchanges. Ivan, what do you think he means? Do you think the United States understand exactly what China means by principle and bottom line?
No, I don't think they do. And I think that the two sides should talk even when they don't agree on the bottom line or the principles. It was simply because both sides have nuclear weapons, and I think that it would be better if their militaries were talking. It's easy to talk to your friends. It's not easy to talk to people who differ with you and may even be adversaries. So I think because of the nuclear weapons issue, I think the military should talk, and that's what we mean by stabilizing the relationship. And there's other reasons too, not just nuclear weapons, but both navies interact with each other in the South China Sea, East China Sea, etc. So even conventional forces can need deconfliction sometimes, and there can be mistakes and incidents that need to be talked about. And if you have an open communication line, that's good. And I think I'm a big proponent of the U.S. improving relations with China, and I think this would be a good thing to have done. And I realize that there's a lot of suspicion on both sides, and there's tension in the relationship. But that's when I think the sides need to talk.
It should be noted that Minister of National Defense Li Shangfu was sanctioned by former Trump administration in 2018 for quote-unquote purchasing Russian weapons, and the sanctions haven't been lifted yet. The Trump administration at least refused to lift those sanctions despite China's strong protest in 2018. Professor Chen, what is the position of the Biden administration on this issue? Will there be a precondition for talks between senior defense officials from both sides to meet?
Well, I think you are exactly right. This is a very important issue. Unfortunately, the Biden administration so far has not indicated any intention to lift such sanctions. Of course, not only on Minister Li Shangfu, but also on some other Chinese, government officials. So this is, would be kind of ridiculous, right? Where you still sanction on, certain individuals, you wanted to have a normal and a friendly discussion. That's impossible. So I think this is common sense. It's not just Chinese government position. I think it's even from an individual perspective, it's a common sense that you cannot sanction someone while trying to be friendly with this individual. Right? I think it's very important for the U.S. government to lift this unnecessary and ridiculous sanctions on Chinese officials, and before we can have a really meaningful and formal discussion. And of course, whether the Biden administration is willing and is bold enough to do such actions, we hope to see some results very soon.
Ivan, what is the United States response on that? I mean, your willingness or your hope to see more exchanges, I think, is reflected on actions by both sides. I mean, the two sides are not without dialogue. For instance, within just the month of May, Wang Yi, who is director of the Office of Foreign Affairs Commission of the Communist Party of China, a very high state leader of China, met with the U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan in Vienna on May the 10th. Chinese Counselor and Foreign Minister Qin Gang met with U.S. Ambassador to China early May, and just days ago, the Commerce Secretary or Commerce Ministers of both countries also sat down and held talks. So it's not like the two sides are not talking or China is not willing to talk to their U.S. counterparts. But on this particular meeting between the defense leaders of both countries, it seems there is a deadlock. What is the perception of the Biden administration on the sanctions issue of the Chinese Defense Minister Li Shangfu?
Well, I think the war in Ukraine has dimmed the West's relationship with Russia, and China, of course, gets dragged into that as well. That's the perception in the West. And I agree with you. I think there still are contacts going on, but I think it is very important to have military-to-military contacts with anyone. Even during the Cold War between the Soviets and the U.S., the two sides had a hotline that they could talk on for nuclear stuff and other stuff.
Do you think the Biden administration may lift?
It's important for both sides to do that now.
Do they understand the sensitivity of the sanctions issue on the exact official that the U.S. Secretary of Defense would like to meet?
Well, I think that's an issue, and I'm sure they understand it. But the question is, perhaps they should get different officials to meet at a lower level first, and then go up the chain if that's the problem, and they can eventually resolve that issue at the higher level.
Professor Chen, what is your suggestion? I mean, for relationship to move ahead, and we do have a very important relationship to manage. Do you think that is a possible approach that China may accept?
Well, I think it's for the Biden administration, it's actually an easy task, right? Because this sanction was imposed by the Trump administration. It's not imposed by the Biden administration. So it's not like you have to correct your own mistakes. It's really somebody else's mistake, and it's not something too hard for the Biden administration to do. And this is a really a necessary precondition for any kind of a meaningful high-level exchange between the two military sides. I mean, it's kind of like I said, it's ridiculous to sanction the top head of China's military, where you try to get a friendly relationship with this person. Imagine the opposite, right? If China sanctions the U.S. defense, chief, and then they're trying to get a friendly talk between the two sides, I don't think that the U.S. side would be very happy with this. So, this is really just a common sense, really, reasoning. I think the Biden administration should be very quick on this.
Why are they not budging? Because it does confuses people. For instance, John Kirby, the spokesperson of U.S. government, has recently expressed the eagerness on the part of some U.S. officials to meet China. Let's listen to this.
Right now, unfortunately, the military-to-military vehicle is just not open to us. It's one of the reasons why Secretary Blinken is so eager to get back over to Beijing. We want to get back to that spirit of Bali. There are lines of communication open, and certainly we have used the diplomatic channel to convey our concerns over this particular intercept.
So on the one hand, the U.S. seems to be very eager to reach out to China, to talk to China, to get the so-called Bali spirit back into action. But on the other hand, a series of recent events, for instance, the shooting down of Chinese so-called spy balloons, and then allowing Taiwan leader Tsai Ing-wen to so-called transit through the United States. And on May 30th, the U.S. Department of Treasury just sanctioned 13 Chinese-based entities and individuals under the pretext of involvement in international proliferation of equipment used to produce illicit drugs. Ivan, it really doesn't seem that the United States is making it very easy for China to accept, high-level dialogues with the United States to work out their differences.
Well, I do agree that countries should probably not sanction high-level officials, leaders, or other high-level officials of other governments, because it does raise these problems. And I would agree that Biden administration probably should take the sanctions off that particular leader to get as a way to make a good faith effort to resume the military contacts, because I think they're very, very important, as I say, because of the nuclear weapons and other reasons that China's a rising military power, and the two militaries do interact. But I think that they haven't done it in part for domestic policy reasons, because unfortunately in the U.S. There's a bipartisan consensus that we need to be more assertive with China, and I think Biden doesn't want to appear weak on China, since he hasn't been all that interested in being perceived as being soft on China, as it were. And that's unfortunate in the U.S., but I think that is a factor. But that's one area where I think that the United States could make change, because as your other guest pointed out, the different political party made the move, and it would be easier to take off in this particular case. And you can make the argument, well, we're not soft on China, we're just trying to facilitate contacts and that sort of thing.
All right. Professor Chen, finally, if you were to give one suggestion as to how this relationship may move forward, what would it be?
Well, just as our U.S. participant also mentioned, it would be to lift the sanctions on some Chinese key officials. I think that's very important. And this year is the window of opportunity, sort of a thing, because next year there will be election in the U.S. Would be more difficult to do such actions. So this year would be really ideal time to lift such sanctions and promote more bilateral exchanges. And we certainly would like to see, Secretary Blinken to come to visit China along with other officials. I think we have 6 months time to stabilize and hopefully improve the relationship a little bit.
All right, many thanks to Professor Chen Dingding from the School of International Studies at Jinan University and Ivan Eland, Director of Center on Peace and Liberty at Independent Institute. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, the world's largest free trade pact just entered into full force with the last signature state, Philippines, on board. What does it mean to the country and the whole Asia-Pacific region? Stay tuned.